It is April 9th, 2015, and a tornado forms just out of Fairdale, Illinois, and a local records this video showing what seems to be a snake tornado and just tearing up the Illinois grasslands. This would actually turn into one of the most strongest tornadoes you've never heard of. At this point, the tornado is starting to gain strength and size very, very quickly. And this tornado was by far the most strongest yet. But that's for later. Now, this somewhat snake-like tornado is just moving at a moderate pace, about 40 to 50 miles an hour. Now, tornado causes nothing more than weak tree damage and or home damage. The tornado was getting stronger, but it was also getting wider as well. The core's winds were estimated at least 110 to 120 miles an hour. But at the start, it was around 85 miles an hour. This tornado was barreling quickly, and it was once a snake, now a cone. These residents would be recording this large tornado as it is slowly creeping towards their little communities that stood in the way. Even though this tornado was not as powerful, it will get much stronger from here on. The tornado at this point is now EF4 intensity. Multiple trees are snapped and or uprooted. Some barns sustain light to weak damage. Nothing more than either the roofs being damaged or shingles being peeled off. This tornado was quickly intensifying, so much so that a disaster was very quickly unfolding. This tornado was much stronger than usual, and even though it had just started, it was only getting more violent and violent. The tornado had an apparent multi-vortex shape, and this has showed signs that this tornado is not playing any games whatsoever. This was thought to be weak, but that was a grave mistake. This tornado is nowhere near weak. It is actually becoming more violent and violent as it approaches the towns that lays ahead. The tornado is now in Ogle County, Illinois, and it too is becoming infamous. The tornado quickly approaches this town of Rochelle, and as it is barreling towards the small community of Rochelle, something is spotted in the fields. Large cycloidal marks are left on the ground, showing that this had a large multi-vortex core. This tornado was not playing any games anymore. It was not weak, but here is Clem Schultz's video of the tornado as it is approaching his home in Fairdale. The tornado is heading towards Rochelle, but even though this footage is taken in Fairdale, which is about 10 miles to the northeast of town, it is actually going to get much worse from here. No tornado is now in Rochelle, and every home is destroyed. Nothing is left. And the Dillon family farm is completely swept away. And the large concrete silos are completely grinded. There's nothing left besides large pieces of shattered concrete. Everything that stood in the path was no longer existing, and people remembered it as just a small little snake, but now it is a massive wedge tornado. This would be one of the strongest tornadoes in Illinois history. However, this from here on would get much worse. The tornado was now barreling towards Clem Schultz, and in a stroke of luck, it slightly meanders, but still heading right towards him. His entire town is engulfed in the winds. Nothing survives. Not a home, not a tree, nothing was left. And at this point, there's nothing anyone could really do instead of just watching this massive beast tear up their hometown. And this tornado was unmistakably violent. Nothing was left. Every home was swept away indefinitely. Trees are reduced to nothing but tall and cracked matchsticks. You think that damage is intense? That is not anywhere close to the worst it can do. The tornado is now leaving Fairdale, but that is when the video ends. The tornado is now quickly entering, or I should say leaving, Rochelle. Every home is gone. Nothing remains of the small town. A Prius that once sat in the owner's driveway was reduced to nothing. It was thrown hundreds of feet, and the car had all of its windows shattered. It was caked in mud, and everything around it was gone. A dog was unfortunately killed as the tornado approached home, but thankfully the owner wasn't there at the time. And the Hayde and Belmont homes were fully swept away, with no trace of debris. Here, you can see the photo of the tornado, showing a menacing wedge. Many homes and or cars were reduced to simply nothing. Not one trace of the nice foundations or homes that once sat there. And this is where it gets dark. Wayne Humphreys, a resident of Rochelle, records as the tornado is passing to his north. And while this tornado passed by, it took a near miss and almost hit him. Thankfully, he would be spared by this large tornado. It was the most devastating the community has ever seen. But that doesn't separate from the fact that this tornado was getting so much violent. The winds were exceeding 200 miles an hour. And here, Derek Myers was filming the tornado as it was passing off to the side. This would show what seems to be a cone tornado. However, this would be the strongest he's ever seen, because this tornado was especially violent to the people that witnessed it, and it was more devastating for the people who had to go through it. At this point, there's nothing anyone could do, and unfortunately, as Clem Schultz's house was hit, his wife, Jacqueline Closa, would lose her life, and her friend, Jacqueline Closa and Geraldine Schultz would lose their lives as the tornado hit their home, and this would be especially devastating. However, I will make a correction. Geraldine Schultz is Clem Schultz's wife. That's my mistake. Anyway, this tornado was quickly becoming violent, and even though it had already reached EF4 plus intensity, it was getting stronger than that. And this was expected just to shift off to the east and dissipate. However, this tornado was not stopping for anybody, and it was only getting stronger and stronger. The core was becoming more violent than it ever has. The path was becoming slightly shaky, but the damage, even though it was violent, the path was a little bit sporadic, and the tornado quickly gained pace, but that doesn't necessarily mean it was gonna just occlude an end. This tornado was getting more worse than someone would ever imagine. This enormous tornado, while not above a mile wide, it was at least 700 yards at its max width. Even though that is just an estimate, it is likely that the tornado was much larger. However, in this footage here, even though it's still the same video, you can see the tornado is gaining a supposed wedge shape. And at this point, the tornado was already devastating enough. I have no words to say, really, because this tornado was beyond imaginable strength. And while most people think tornadoes are weak and harmless, that is actually beyond the truth. You can compare this tornado to stuff like Marion 2025 or any other tornado you can think of that was rated EF4, EF3, and should have been EF5. You would know that Rochelle was obviously the stronger of all. And this was especially devastating for anyone that encountered the tornado because almost everything was gone. And the community of Rochelle and Fairdale were infected. But unfortunately, 2 people did lose their lives as a result, and 11 people would be seriously injured. Thankfully, none of those numbers went any higher, especially with the intensity of this tornado. The large tornado was finally leaving Fairdale. However, it still had a little bit of miles left on its track. The tornado was the strongest in history because every structure that was hit was reduced to nothing. And here, this was actually the first tornado of the outbreak, an EF2 tornado near Lakeview, Texas. And this tornado would damage a few homes and trees. It was near the town of Longview, but it actually impacted Mixon. This EF1 right here was at least a quarter of a mile wide or more. Another EF1 touchdown, half a mile wide. And then, moving on. An EF1 impacted the towns of Durant and Sunbury and Plainview. This tornado was leaving Iowa. However, passed by the Clinton County Sportsman Club before dissipating. Then, a new tornado dropped down near Lowmore, Illinois, or Iowa. A tornado crossed over Wares Lake before dissipating. This next tornado would travel through a forested and mostly fielded area. No structures were impacted, and if they were lightly destroyed. Next, the infamous tornado. The tornado quickly formed over Franklin Grove, Illinois, and it hit the Parsons manufacturing plant, which was previously hit by a tornado in 2004. This new tornado was quickly getting stronger. Multiple well-built homes were swept away. Everything that was touched by the core was simply eviscerated and never to be seen again. The tornado passed by Scare Park and kept moving on. The tornado was trudging at approximately 57 miles an hour. It would hit more trees and large structures. They were swept away and never to be seen again. The tornado crossed onto many roads, and equivalent to the power of this tornado was also more devastating than anything. Fairdale was the last town hit by the tornado before it dissipated. Then, a satellite tornado touched down near Kingsbury Creek. And there was one unmentioned tornado that touched down near the tornado itself. Then, another weak EF0 touchdown. Then, yet another short-lived tornado impacted Summerfield Zoo. After that, a tornado touched down just to the northeast or south of... I forgot it. Anyway, tornado would quickly rope out, and this outbreak was very significant. Multiple tornadoes formed, and the longest-lived and strongest was arguably Rochelle. Finally, the tornado roped out after 45 minutes, or 3/4 of an hour. This is unmistakably the strongest tornado ever. However, what everyone likes to call it is this ominous title. The controversial EF4. Why we say that is because it was never rated EF4 or EF5.